H. Rider Haggard, before Tarzan, before Conan the Barbarian, before The Lost World, before The Mummy, okay? Before every jungle adventure you've ever read, there was H. Rider Haggard. He was a writer. Most people have forgotten about him by now. He was the man who invented adventure fiction. I'm looking at some notes here so I don't forget anything. And yeah, he's not just the man who invented adventure fiction, though. I like to think of him as the father, the forgotten father of adventure fiction. His first novel in the adventure genre was published in 1885. It was called King Solomon's Mines. And it's impossible to state how important it was to this kind of literature, okay? And that's how it started. So I'm Randy, and this is the Literate Texan. We talk about books here, highbrow, lowbrow, anything in between. This is a different kind of video for me because it's a video that's focused on one author, and I want to give you a broad overview of that author. But, and I'll tell you why this came about. I was talking with one of my former college professors the other night. We've stayed friends for 40 years after college. And he told me he was reading King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard and asked me if I knew who H. Rider Haggard was, which is a question I don't feel like anyone should have to ask, but as a matter of fact, I did know, but I thought maybe I don't know as much about H. Rider Haggard as I should. So I did some research and I decided to pour that research into this video. This video is separated into chapters, okay? Chapter 1, I'm going to tell you what you can look forward to here. In Chapter 1, you've got He Invented Adventure. Chapter 2, The Man Behind the Myth. Chapter 3, The Big Three, King Solomon's Mines, She, and Allan Quatermain. Chapter 4, Lost Worlds and Hidden Gems. Chapter 5, Why Haggard Matters. Chapter 6, Getting Started. Chapter 7, Why He's Been Forgotten and Why That's a Mistake. Chapter 8 is, well, actually, Chapter 8's a hidden track. I'm not going to tell you what's in Chapter 8 until we get there, okay? So, you're going to love this. All right, but let's talk about H. Rider Haggard first, okay? This is, He Invented Adventure. So if you're a fan of like The Mummy or King Kong or Tomb Raider even, then you should be a fan of H. Rider Haggard because it all started with him, okay? But who was he, okay? Who was H. Rider Haggard? And that's really interesting, actually. He was a, he used to be one of the most famous writers who ever lived. He was a big celebrity. In Victorian times, okay, celebrities weren't rock stars, okay? Celebrities weren't movie stars. They were authors. And H. Rider Haggard was huge. He was really big. Now, he wasn't Charles Dickens, don't get me wrong. Nobody's Charles Dickens. But he was a big, big, big writer. One of his books, She, which we'll get to in a few minutes, outsold Dracula, if you can believe that. And Dracula was a big seller, okay? But, yeah, so that was King Solomon's Mine. His first big one was sold in 1885. And that, everybody in the world got adventure fever after that. But nowadays, almost nobody knows what his name is and stuff. So it's kind of a weird thing. But yeah, without him, okay, this huge chunk of pop culture, and I've seen some literary critics say 50% or more of the pop culture that we have today wouldn't exist if H. Rider Haggard hadn't inspired the writers in the way that he did. So that's tremendous, okay? Empires. Yeah. Empires. Readers could open an H. Rider Haggard book and find a whole new world inside. Well, that's what I'm always looking for when I'm opening up a book. When I was growing up, I found a whole new world inside of The Lord of the Rings, but other people had different experiences. Obviously The Lord of the Rings wasn't available in 1885, but H. Rider Haggard was available then. And that's why I like to think of him as the forgotten father of adventure fiction, because he was so huge. He was just such a big deal. And then boom, wow, nobody knows about him anymore. 1885, seems like it was a long time ago, but really it was only 140 years ago. And there's a lot of authors from that time period that we talk about a lot more often than we talk about H. Rider Haggard. Go figure. Okay, so yeah, we're going to dig up some of his wildest stories in this video, okay? Now, we're not just going to talk about King Solomon's mine and she. You know, we're going to talk about some of his lesser-known gems here, too. So, yeah. But now we're going to move on to chapter 2. The man behind the myth. I guess that's what I covered in this first chapter, is the myth. Okay, so H. Rider Haggard, he was not a scholar. He was not a professor. He was not an explorer. He was not, in his personal life, an adventurer. Okay, in the 1870s, when he was in his 20s, he was a corporate bureaucrat, or not a corporate bureaucrat, a government bureaucrat, forgive me. Okay, he was an attorney, and he was sent as part of his clerk duties to Africa. And his job was to write reports about what was going on in Africa at the time, because it was part of the British Empire. And you've heard the expression, the sun never set on the British Empire. That's because, you know, they had all these colonies under their purview all over the globe, including in Africa. So there he is in Africa, and he's supposed to be writing these reports. But what he's actually interested in is the desert. And he's actually interested in the stories that he's hearing and the legends that he's hearing over here. And he's also interested in the sense of danger and the sense of adventure over here. And he brings all that back with him to London in the 1880s, okay? And he's still a lawyer. He's still a clerk. And he's bored silly with his work. I mean, he's so bored, it's a wonder his heart is still beating. So he decides he's going to start writing novels. Why not? It seems like lots of people are writing novels these days, so you got to give a hand to it. So in the first few novels he tried, no luck at all, okay? Kind of a big bummer. But then a friend of his made a bet with him, okay? And he bet his friend that he could write an adventure novel that was better and more exciting than Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. And as a result, he wrote King Solomon's Mines, okay? So if you've read Treasure Island or know anything about it, you know that most kids who've read it, read it, and they want to be a pirate. The thing about King Solomon's Mines is that it's read mostly by adults. And you don't read it and think, golly, I want to be a pirate. But you do read it and think, well, maybe I need a little danger and excitement in life. Maybe I do need a little adventure in my life. I would say that he succeeded. I think King Solomon's Mines is more exciting and a better adventure novel than Treasure Island. Although, I'm not taking anything away from Treasure Island. Don't get me wrong. Treasure Island is great. Robert Louis Stevenson is great. So that's what we got. And that's how he got started, okay? Now, also, he wasn't part of the London literary establishment. You know, those guys all hung out together and stuff. H. Rider Haggard lived on a farm. He was one of those gentleman farmer types that you think about. And he spent his mornings writing fiction, but he spent his afternoons running the estate, running the farm. So yeah, but he wrote like a man with, with a deadline, like he was racing, like he was sprinting towards something. And as a result, he wrote he wrote 69 books total, over 50 novels. And I've got the numbers here. Okay, and this is interesting to me because I'm a completist and I've decided to do a project where I'm going to read all of H. Rider Haggard. Now, if you want to join me in that project, that's fine. Just let me know and stuff. So I'm really interested in doing this. But what do you have to do to read all of H. Rider Haggard, okay? There's a total of 69 books, okay? 56 of them are novels. That's the vast majority of them. But he also wrote 3 collections of short stories and then 10 books of nonfiction. All total, you're looking at approximately, and this is just a guesstimate based on, the average novel you find in a Penguin edition, if you can find one in a Penguin edition, it's around 320 pages, give or take. The nonfiction books are a little shorter, they're about 280. At any rate, I came up with a number of 20,840 pages total. 20,000 pages total, almost 21,000 pages total. Okay, so if you want to know how long it's going to take to read that, all you have to do is know how many pages per hour that you read. Okay, so most people, an average person reads about 50 pages per hour. So you divide one into the other, and you get a total number of hours that you need to spend. So if you're a slow reader like me, I've gotten slower as I've gotten older. It's going to take you 521 hours if you're reading at 40 pages per hour. If you're an average reader, then at 50 pages per hour, you're going to need 417 hours. And if you're a fast reader, then you're looking at 60 pages per hour, and you're looking at 347 hours. Now, that total number of hours is misleadingly large, okay? You're probably more interested in how many weeks or months or years it's going to take. But that's pretty easy to figure out, too. You just decide how many hours a day you're going to spend reading H. Rider Haggard, okay? Now, I don't know anybody who's going to read H. Rider Haggard for 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day or 4 hours a day, okay? But I've got the numbers here in case you do, okay? So if you're reading 2 hours a day, you know, you're looking at finishing up in, somewhere between 7 and 8 months. If you're reading for 3 hours a day, you can finish everything by H. Rider Haggard in about 4.5 months. That's dedication right there, folks. But if you're reading 4 hours a day, and to pull off 4 hours a day of H. Rider Haggard, I can't imagine unless you're just really obsessed. But if you are really obsessed, you can finish it in about 3.5 months, maybe 6 months if you're a slower reader. What I suggest is a more tempered pace of about an hour a day. And you can mix that up a little bit, maybe 2 hours a day on the weekends, maybe taking a week off here or there or whatever. But if you limit it to an hour a day, this is what you're looking at. If you're a slow reader like me, you're looking at 17 months. That's a year and 5 months. That's a year and a half. If you can devote an hour a day to reading H. Rider Haggard, which I feel like I can. So for the next year and a half, you're going to be hearing about H. Rider Haggard from me. Okay, but if you're a faster reader, an average reader, finish in 14 months. It's going to take you a little over a year. Okay, a year and 2 months. And then if you're a fast reader at 60 pages per hour, you're going to finish in less than a year, 11.5 months. So yeah, these are certainly not insurmountable goals if you decide you really love H. Rider Haggard. And you may love him, you may not. Not everybody is into coming up with reading challenges the way I am. But I love H. Rider Haggard. I think he's terrific. I think he's one of the greatest authors of all time. So I'm going to dive off in there and start reading them. And I'm going to start over from scratch. I've read several of them before now, but I'm just going to start from scratch and see how long it takes me to go with it and stuff. So, Gentleman Farmer, King Solomon's Mines made him immortal. Okay? So, next up, we have got Chapter 3, The Big Three, King Solomon's Mines, She, and Allan Quatermain. That's Chapter 3. These are the books I would suggest starting with, okay? And these are the most famous ones. And honestly, if you've read 3 of these, you're light years ahead of almost everybody else in this generation, okay? So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about these. King Solomon's Mines is a novel. It's a story about 3 men. They're explorers, and there's a missing explorer. And they're going to look for him, and they don't really have anything but an old map to follow. And they have no idea what lies in store for them. They're going to find traps. They're going to find betrayals. They're going to find a lost tribe, of course. They're going to find diamonds. And they're going to find a moral reckoning, which is important. The second book out of the big 3 is called She. And she is, I should mention too, King Solomon's Mine is way faster paced than most of what most Victorians were used to at the time. It speeds along, which is another reason that it's so influential on adventure novels, is because of the pacing. But then you've got She, and She is really great, okay? I love She. She is basically the story of some explorers who meet a queen of a lost tribe. But she's not just any queen. She's 2,000 years old and she lives in a volcano. All right? So, being a Dungeons and Dragons player and stuff, I see that as the beginning of a great plot line. H. Rider Haggard did too and wrote a great novel about it. So definitely worth reading, okay? And her name is Aisha. She's iconic now. Part goddess and part nightmare is what I wrote in my notes here. So it's a really great book. It outsold Dracula. C.S. Lewis said it haunted him every day after he read it until he died. J.R.R. Tolkien, he loved it too. So yeah, talk about influential, because those are your big fantasy guys in the back in the day, C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. So if you're influencing them, you're doing something, okay? And then yeah, any horror, fantasy, metaphysical combinations. That's where it first kind of got mixed up in an alchemist's brew to create something bigger than itself. I almost forgot. This novel answers the question, or tries to answer the question, what happens when you are a man who finally finds exactly what he's always been looking for? It's a deeper question than you think, and that's what the novel explores. It's not just an adventure about an ancient woman who doesn't get old and she's still beautiful, okay? There's a lot more to it than that. Finally, and that was published the year after King Solomon's Mines. King Solomon's Mines was 1885. She was 1886. And then Allan Quatermain came out in 1887. Now, Allan Quatermain was one of the main characters in King Solomon's Mines. So H. Rider Haggard did something really cool. He kills him off in the very first chapter of the novel that he named after him, Allan Quatermain. And then, after that, he sends him on one final expedition to a hidden civilization. This is part elegy, part adventure, and it's kind of the beginning of the adventurer philosopher trope. You know, most adventurers that we see these days, they're thoughtful people. Think about Indiana Jones, okay? He's not just some greedy guy, you know. There's a lot more going on there. I don't know how much you watch Star Trek The Next Generation, but Captain Picard's main hobby is archaeology. And, you know, Captain Picard's a deep thinker, right? So every further something to Allan Quatermain. Yeah, all your philosopher adventurers, they have Allan Quatermain as part of their DNA. That's what that note's supposed to say. So basically, what we're looking at here is H. Rider Haggard created an entire mythology in just 3 books. Chapter 4, Lost Worlds and Hidden Gems. Like I said before, H. Rider Haggard was writing as if he were racing against time. And most of the readers I know are reading against time. And especially when they get just a little bit older, they start to realize that. So yeah, so he wrote a bunch of stuff, and I just want to give you a taste of the multiverse that he created. That's right, yeah, H. Rider Haggard created the first multiverse. So Lost Worlds and Romances, you've got People of the Mist, which is next on my list. It's a good candidate for Victober, but it's also a good candidate because it's Halloween and it's kind of scary, okay? But it's a love story and a treasure hunt combined. Nada the Lily was published in 1892. Now, this is real interesting. This is a real bold choice on his part, too. This is a novel about the Zulus, but it's told from the perspective of the Africans. It's not told from the perspective of the white people. I don't know how controversial that would be, or if that would be considered cultural appropriation today or not. But I consider it a really bold move on behalf of any writer, especially a white writer, regardless of the time period. And then Heart of the World is about a couple of explorers who find an Aztec kingdom. Not just adventures. Okay, so these weren't just adventures. These were thought experiments that H. Rider Haggard was having about civilizations in particular and civilization in general. Okay, he also wrote historical fiction and fantasy. A lot of this, every book was an experiment for him. He wrote a book called Montezuma's Daughter, which is a revenge tragedy combined with a conquistador realism. Then there was Eric Bright Eyes. Eric Bright Eyes is one I'm really looking forward to. It's about a Viking philosopher, and it's got swords and sages and sagas and doom all at the same time. I'm just really excited about that. It's going to be a different change of pace, that's for sure. The Ghost Kings is another one. This has got Africa legends combined with supernatural horror. So, yeah, that sounds great too. And When the World Shook. All right, first of all, I love that title, And When the World Shook. But get this. This is a early example of cosmic horror, and it's about the end of the world. The explorers in this book awaken a sleeping god. Supernatural, big stuff, cosmic horror. That's all H.P. Lovecraft kind of stuff. And here it is in the 1880s or 1890s from H. Rider Haggard, blazing a trail for all of us. So, and then here's just some names of some books, okay? The Brethren, The Yellow God, Queen Sheba's Ring, The Ancient Allan. That's about Allan Quatermain again, too. There were a bunch of books about Allan Quatermain. The Wanderer's Necklace, The Mahatma and the Hare. The Mahatma and the Hare. Now, there's an interesting idea. That one is a parable, almost like an Aesop's Fable kind of story. So he did all kinds of stuff. By the 1920s, he had just written all kinds of crazy, weird, experimental stuff, okay? Chapter 5, Why Haggard Matters. Okay, so here's why H. Rider Haggard matters, okay? He's not just writing about people who are searching for gold or exploring or trying to find the secret to immortality or whatever, okay? He's really writing about what do you find when you go off the edge of the map, when you get to the part of the world where no one's ever been before. What is the point of all this exploring anyway, okay? His view of Imperial England and its colonies is not a background panorama, it's a mirror, okay? It tells you things about yourself, and so do his books, all right? But what's after the edge of the map? And it doesn't matter if you find the diamonds. What happens after you find the diamonds? Are you satisfied? Is that what you needed? What happens when you find a 2,000-year-old woman and you learn the secret of immortality? Does that satisfy you? You happy now? What about immortality? Let's talk about immortality again. Immortality is a trick, okay? And these are tropes and themes that come up again and again, but it started here, okay? So, in the big question, okay, that he's asking in all of these books, and the reason that his work matters so much is the big question. Was it worth it? Was it worth it? Okay, so yeah, I talked about that already, and I talked about that already. Okay, next up, Chapter 6, His Influence and Legacy. I've already talked a lot about his influence and his legacy, okay? If you were paying attention during the introduction, you know what I'm talking about here. But let's just look at it again, okay? Without H. Rider Haggard, here's what we would not have. We would not have The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle. We would probably not have Tarzan or Conan the Barbarian, which was, let's face it, Conan was kind of borrowed from or heavily influenced by Tarzan. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I believe that's accurate. Michael K. Vaughan might have an answer for you there. But you know what? Even Middle-earth is heavily influenced by H. Rider Haggard, because when you think about Middle-earth, you're thinking about this society that's built on top of old societies that are no more, which are also built on old societies which are no more. It's got this sense of history going way back. That started in H. Rider Haggard, okay? That's where that comes from. C.S. Lewis said that the novel She kept him up at night for the rest of his life. That's an imaginative man for one thing, but that is quite an effect to have, okay? So what else have we got on here? Middle-earth, I already talked about. What about H.P. Lovecraft? You know, we'd already talked about the cosmic horror. Michael Moorcock, heavily influenced, and will admit that he's heavily influenced by H. Rider Haggard. Neil Gaiman, heavily influenced by H. Rider Haggard. That's not necessarily a feather in his cap anymore, since everybody's jumped on the I hate Neil Gaiman train. I'm going to say nothing else about that. But, you know, he's just, anytime you read anything about lost cities or some kind of relic with a curse on it, you're hearing echoes of H. Rider Haggard's novels and short stories. That's what you're doing, okay? And all of his stories have a similar arc to them that gets repeated in a lot of fiction. You've got, and I wrote it down here, it's like a 4-part formula. First, you've got discovery, okay? They discover something. Then they have awe. They're amazed by what they discovered. Then they've got hubris. They're really proud, okay? And what comes after that? What comes after that? Doom, okay? After pride comes the fall. And that's what we've got here, okay? And also, movies, TV shows. From the 1930s to the 1960s, there were blatant movies about Allan Quatermain that came out all the time. But we got to keep in mind, Allan Quatermain wrote this stuff before Hollywood as we know it even existed. Okay? So, Chapter 7, Deep Cuts and Oddities. That's Chapter 7 coming up. So after he's written all these adventures, and they were really cool and stuff, he decides to get even stranger and odder. As his books go along, they get weirder and weirder. And I've got some examples here, especially about the spiritual philosopher adventurer. The Yellow God is a book about mysticism and greed, and it's a parable about obsession. And we talked earlier about a parable that he wrote. I'll have more to say about it in a moment, but then you got When the World Shook. We talked about that already just briefly. But, it's hard to imagine how weird it was to read a novel before H.G. Wells of cosmic science fiction and cosmic horror. The Mahatma and the Hare, we talked about that earlier. Basically, it's an Aesop's fable with Mahatma in it. Go figure. I haven't read that one yet. I don't know what to think about it. But then time travel and reincarnation. These are subjects that were still new. And he was still pioneering some of this and stuff. So you had Allan Quatermain. He's being reincarnated all the time. Full-blown reincarnation adventures in different places. So, and he even gets to explore prehistory. You've got... what are these novels called? There's the Ancient Allan and Allan and the Ice Gods. Follow those plot lines and stuff. So I can't wait to get into those. And he wrote historical dramas, straight history fiction. Cleopatra, Morning Star, The Wanderer's Necklace, Alyssa, The Doom of Zimbabwe. That's all straight horror fiction. But even with his straight horror fiction, you're still getting hints of what he cares about, just like you would in any author's books, whether they're nonfiction or not. He's obsessed with fate and obsession. Okay, so he just refused to stay in one box, okay, which reminds me of some other authors. Stephen King tries to stray outside of one box, but I think H. Rider Haggard did a better job of really writing diverse stuff. So, every book was another experiment, okay? So, Chapter 8, Getting Started. Okay, even if you're only interested in his novels, 56 novels is a lot. You're not going to read those this weekend. You're not going to read them next week. You're not going to read them next month. It's going to take some time. But where do you get started? I'm going to suggest getting started where most people get started. For one thing, because you're going to have an easier time of finding the book. And that's getting started with King Solomon's Mines, which came out in 1885. It's easy to find at most used bookstores. That's where I got my copy of it. And it's a great book. It's not like, he wrote really crappy books and then his books later got good. He started off pretty good. This is a really, really good book. So start off with that. Or if you're more interested in something a little weirder, find you a copy of She, about the 2,000-year-old queen that rules her tribe from her volcanic mansion. Okay, that's really great too. Number 3 on my list, I've got Allan Quatermain. We already talked about that. There's no reason you can't start with Allan Quatermain. I haven't read it yet, but I'm dying to read a novel where the main character gets killed off in the first chapter. And then number 4, People of the Mist. People of the Mist is what I am starting this month for my Victober read that's going to coincide with Halloween, okay? I wanted to get a little H. Rider Haggard in there. So if you want something even stranger than that, go find yourself a copy of When the World Shook. Get yourself a little cosmic science fiction and apocalypse there. Or find a copy of Eric Bright Eyes and read about a Viking philosopher and his love affairs. Or Nadia, the Lily, that's got to be weird, man. It's a story told from the perspective of the Africans in the book. So any of those would be a cool place to start with H. Rider Haggard, and that's my request of you. That's what the marketers call a call to action. Let's bring Haggard back. The best way to bring Haggard back, start reading him, okay? And then I've got a bonus track here, okay? I'll get to that in a second. Chapter 9 is a bonus track that I didn't list in the table of contents. Okay, so you're asking, Randy, if H. Rider Haggard is such a great writer and these books are so good, why did he get forgotten? What was that all about? Why has he been forgotten? And so, I'm going to say one thing is, times do change, okay? And genres change over time. And that has happened with the adventure fiction genre. It is changed. Okay, the way we tell stories has changed. All of Victorian literature has seen a decrease in popularity because that's just what happens over time. Some of it more than others. I think Sherlock Holmes is still super popular, but a lot of Victorian fiction has gone by the wayside. But I don't think that's the main thing. I think the main reason that that we don't read Allan Quatermain anymore is we don't go to books for adventure anymore. As a general rule, if people are looking for thrills, if they're looking for adventure, if they're looking for a sense of danger, and then they're looking for it at the movies, and they're looking for it even more so from video games, okay? And it's hard to compete with movies and video games. A lot of people just don't read. They don't provide the kind of stimulation. And it's a specific kind of stimulation in your brain that video games and movies offer. But I want to suggest that you keep in mind that these video games and movies that are in the adventure genre would not exist if Allan Quatermain had not written these books first. So, when you read Haggard, you're not just reading Victorian fiction, okay? You are touching the spark behind every adventurer and every pulp hero to come afterwards. I wrote that in my notes so that I could read it to you, okay? And that's why, even though he's relatively forgotten, that's why we should remember him, folks. Because he's reminding us of what it's like to be ourselves, to be humans. Because we all have that longing for adventure somewhere inside of us. And I'm going to wrap up with a conclusion next. So yeah, before Indiana Jones, before Conan, before Tarzan, there was H. Rider Haggard. There were the Allan Quatermain series. There was his other books too. And I made this video because I think H. Rider Haggard deserves to be remembered. I think his books are good and they deserve to be read and reread. They're hard to find. A lot of them are really hard to find, especially if you insist on reading them on paper. But if you don't mind reading ebooks, and I don't, I've gotten over that, you can find there's a company on Amazon called Delphi, and they publish complete works from various authors. I suggest looking there for the complete works of H. Rider Haggard. And, if you've already read an H. Rider Haggard novel, talk about it in the comments below. If you haven't, which one do you think you might want to start with? Or did I fail? Are you convinced that you're not going to read anything by H. Rider Haggard? If that's the case, mention that in the comments down below too. I'm not going to stop making videos, and I'm going to continue to make videos about forgotten authors who were really influential. So if you've got a candidate for something like that, be sure to mention that in the comments. And I might also mention them in a future video. Until then, I love you folks, and I want you to stay hydrated, but I also want you to stay sexy. See you in the next video.